Bibles with me to 2 Samuel chapter 6. 2 Samuel chapter 6. And while you're at it, if you want to also be turning to 1 Chronicles chapter 13, we're going to be kind of flipping back and forth between those two passages, along with some others this evening. As we're going through our reading of the Old Testament in a year, this week we will be traversing the ground of 2 Samuel chapter 6. And I wanted to preach on Uzzah again. I think I delivered a lesson on Uzzah back in 2024, if I remember what my notes said. And I wanted to take another stab at the lesson, another stab at the topic. And so if you write in the margins of your Bible, because I know several of you do, and you've got notes there from where I preached on it previously, these notes will be different. So go ahead and find you an extra space to write some more notes. We're going to take a second look at this passage. If you ever go to Arlington National Cemetery, scattered throughout the entire facility are these round signs. And they all say, silence and respect. They say that because Arlington is sacred ground. It didn't quite start out that way. In fact, when Robert E. Lee decided to go with the Confederates, the Unionists took his plantation and desecrated it by just burying people in the rose garden and in the front yard and in the backyard. But as the Civil War progressed, it became quite evident there would need to be a place where these dead were buried. And from those origins, it has become the sacred ground that it is today. It is indeed America's holy ground. And the dead, those rows of white crosses, white stars of David, and the headstones that go along those rolling hills and along the fields along the river basin, they indeed demand silence and respect for what they stand for and who they were and what they did. We get that, don't we? We get that. What I'd like for us to do this evening is take that concept of that we know that something is sacred and something is holy, therefore it demands that we act a certain way. I want us to take that idea and apply it to our God. And the way that we reverence His name and honor who He is. Because in 2 Samuel chapter 6, we have a passage where Uzzah, as we have in the title, but not only him, all those who were in that entourage, including King David, do not regard God as holy. And at least for Uzzah, he suffers the consequences. So let's turn to our passage. I want to just give a brief summary statement about the ark itself. The ark really was the tangible focal point of God's presence and covenant with Israel. The children of Israel were not supposed to make any kind of graven image or any kind of idol to represent God. But if there was one thing that kind of represented God's presence among the people, it was the ark itself. And I just want you to notice verse 2 of 2 Samuel 6. I've got a couple of phrases underlined here. It says that David arose and went with all the people who were with him to Baal, Judah, to bring up the ark of God. It wasn't just any ark. It is God's ark, which is called, and we have a very long description of this ark and its name, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who sits enthroned on the cherubim. This is a sacred golden box that represented God's presence among the people. Go back with me to Exodus chapter 25. This is the portion of the law of Moses that talks about all the furnishings that would be inside the tabernacle. Among those furnishings is we have the ark. Here, though, it is called the Ark of the Covenant. That this ark it housed those 10 commandments that form the basis of the covenant between God and between Israel. The covenant starts out, I am the Lord your God who delivered you out of Egypt. Therefore, and then we have the 10 commandments that follow. And so here's the construction of the ark beginning with verse 10. It's made out of acacia wood. It's 2 cubits and a half length and a cubit and a half breadth. And its breadth and a cubit and a half. Its height, it's overlaid with gold inside and out. We also learn in verse 13 that there's supposed to be poles of acacia wood. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think I realized it until studying for this lesson that even the poles were overlaid with gold. I don't think I'd ever envisioned them that way, but that is what they were according to verse 13. The poles are supposed to be put in rings on the ark. That's how it's going to be carried. That's obviously something we'll look at in a little bit. But I just want you to skip down with me to verse 19. 17. Because not only do we learn the dimensions of and the materials, now with verse 17 we kind of learn the significance. You shall make a mercy seat of pure gold, or you shall make a cover for it. It's going to be 2 cubits and a half shall be its length, a cubit its height and breadth. You shall make 2 cherubim of gold, of hammered work shall be made of them on the 2 ends of the mercy seat. Now verse 13. Make 1 cherub on one end and 1 cherub on the other end. Of one piece with the mercy seat shall you make the cherubim of its 2 ends. The cherubim shall spread its wings above, overshadowing the mercy seat with its wings. They shall face one another toward the mercy seat, shall the faces of the cherubim be. And you shall put the mercy seat on top of the ark, and in the ark you shall put the testimony that I shall give you. There, God says, I will meet with you, and from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim that are on the ark of the testimony, I will speak with you about all that I will give you in commandment for the people of Israel. God is going to meet His people there. Well, you can learn a little bit more in Leviticus chapter 16 about the ark and its transportation, its significance. But I want to go to Numbers chapter 7. Numbers chapter 7. And that's not a typo. We are going to go to verse 89. Even though I wrote it in the notes, I still went back because I knew I had typed it in incorrectly. It indeed is verse 89. I just want you to hear what it has to say. It says, when Moses would go into the tent of the meeting, he would speak to the Lord, or with the Lord. He heard the voice speaking to him from above the mercy seat that was on the ark of the testimony, from between the 2 cherubim, and it spoke to him. This, the ark, is the place where God met with Israel, whether it was through the representative of Moses or it's going to be through the representative of the high priest who could go in there once a year. This was the only tangible thing that they had, that the people knew was there, that they were one with their God. This was a sacred object for Israel. Well, we won't go into all the history about how the ark winds up where it's at so that David wants to move it into Jerusalem. You can go back to 1 Samuel chapter 4 and read about all that if you need a refresher. We will go to 1 Samuel chapter 5 a little bit later. But David gets the idea that he wants to prioritize moving this ark into Jerusalem. But in so doing, he's actually prioritizing his own desires over God's instructions regarding the ark. So I want to kind of unpack this for just a moment. Number one, his initial motive kind of seems to be rooted into his own plans rather than God's explicit directions. So if you got your Bibles, let's look at 1 Samuel or 2 Samuel chapter 6. I want you to notice with me verse 1. It says, David gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000 men. That word chosen it has a very broad and wide-ranging meaning and application. But one of them is, it's a military term. It is about the quality of the soldier. They are chosen soldiers. I would submit to you that David is approaching this as a military operation. Now, why would I say that? Well, go with me to 1 Chronicles chapter 13. I know we're looking at parallel accounts. The Samuel account has its own direction and its own application to the day and time at which it was given to the children of Israel, and Chronicles has its own application and its own purposes. For tonight's lesson, we're just going to mesh them all together, okay? So go with me to 1 Chronicles chapter 13. And again, if I say Corinthians, you know it's Chronicles. We're not going to Corinthians tonight, so I might mess up and say it. 1 Chronicles chapter 13. Notice verse 1. Who does David consult with? David consulted with the commanders of thousands and of hundreds and every leader. This, I would submit to you, and from David's point of view, is a military operation. It is not a religious operation. It is not a spiritual operation per se. It's purely military. Now, we can go on and read. David said to all the assembly of Israel, if it seems good to you and from the Lord our God, let us send abroad to our brothers who remain in all the lands of Israel, as well as to the priests and the Levites in the cities that have pasture lands, that they may be gathered to us. Then let us bring up again the ark of God to us, for we did not seek it in the days of Saul. All the assembly agreed to do so, for the thing seemed right in the eyes of the people. And so, from the outset, it seems that David is approaching this like David would have any other military operation. I might go ahead and throw chapter 15 in. If you want to just look, in my Bible, it's the same opening. It says David's going to build houses for himself in the city of David. He's going to prepare a place for the ark of God and pitch a tent for it. And then David's going to say that no one but the Levites may carry the ark of God, for the Lord has chosen them to carry the ark of the Lord and to minister to him forever. This doesn't seem to be spiritual, because chapter 15 is actually after Uzzah dies and the debacle that we're focusing on. It doesn't seem to have been a religious operation. It seems to be purely military. Let me give you this. They also transported the ark in a manner that was contrary to God's ordained method. It kind of stands to reason that this would kind of almost flow out of that, right? If this is not a religious procession, if this is not a religious operation run by a bunch of military men, it's not going to be done in the prescribed religious manner. Now, you can go back to Numbers chapter 4 and verse 15 and chapter 7 and verse 9. You can read the passages there that it's not only supposed to be Levites, but it's the sons of the Kohathites who are supposed to be the ones who are not only, I shouldn't say handling the ark, but transporting the ark, seeing to its movement and the breaking down of the tabernacle and the covering of the ark and inserting the poles and carrying it. Carrying it. Instead, we go back to 2 Samuel chapter 6. Instead of carrying it, they're going to put it on a cart. Let's pick up the reading with verse 6. So when they had come to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah put out his hand. I'm sorry, I'm gotten ahead of myself. Chapter 6, look with me at verse 2. I'm sorry. David arose and he went with all the people who were with him to Bel Judah to bring up the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who sits enthroned on the cherubim. And they carried the ark of God, not on poles, but on a new cart. And they brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart with the ark of God, and also Ahio went before the ark. So they're going to put it on a cart, new cart, at least it's new, and they're going to pull it with oxen or pull it with some kind of beast of burden. The problem with this is that it's not how God prescribed. But what makes it even worse You can go back to 1 Samuel chapter 5 when the Philistines actually capture the ark and send it back to Israel. They send it back on a cart pulled by 2 milk cows. It's bad enough that they're not following God's prescribed method. It's even worse that the method of the idolatrous people is the one that they are following. They are just totally disregarding God on multiple levels. But then it gets worse from here. The ark was carried by individuals not designated for the sacred task. We learned that 2 of these people, you can look in verses 5 and 7. One of them is named Uzzah, the other is named Ahio. We've been introduced to them, but let's look at what happens. So David and all the house of Israel are celebrating, this is 2 Samuel 6:5, before the Lord with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castings and cymbals. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah is going to put his hand out to the ark of God, and he's going to take hold of it. For the oxen had stumbled, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down because of his error, and he died there beside the ark of God. I would submit to you that Ahio and Uzzah are not Levites. They're not supposed to even be there in close proximity to the tabernacle. Sure, they had been keepers of the ark. Their grandfather Abinadab, or maybe their father Eleazar, or perhaps some translations will read it, their brother. And it's assumed that these guys were keepers of the ark. They must have been Levites, and it must have been given to them because they would know how to take care of the ark. If they knew how to take care of the ark, they would have transported the ark correctly. I would submit to you that they weren't Levites at all. And I think a piece of compelling evidence is 1 Corinthians chapter 15, which we read just a moment ago, that David is going to chastise, if you will, maybe himself, maybe the rest of the group. He's going to say to the Levites, you weren't with us the first time. That's why all of this has happened to us. Because we were not following the prescribed order. We didn't have the right motive, we didn't have the right method, and we didn't have the right people doing this job. They had no regard whatsoever for not only for what they were handling, but who they were dealing with. And that was God. Because I would submit to you that they viewed the ark as some kind of talisman while neglecting their relationship with the God that it represented. And this was the problem to begin with. In 1 Samuel chapter 4, the whole reason that the ark winds up at the house of Abinadab and David has to move it is because the Philistines had captured the ark. Israel in 1 Samuel chapter 4 was going to war with their archenemy, the Philistines. Things were not going well. And so the people, it says in verse 4, sent to Shiloh and brought from there the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim. And the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant. They want to bring the ark so that it would give them victory. What happened was, it brought them defeat. Because they're just using the ark as some kind of lucky charm. That they put more faith in the box than in the God who made the box holy. They're just using it as a talisman. There's another place that we see this. I'm going to go to Jeremiah chapter 7. This is much later in Israel's history. The nation has sinned. The kings are not following God like David did. And destruction is going to be coming upon them. I'll just pick the reading up with verse 1. The word has come to Jeremiah from the Lord. He's going to say to him, stand in the gate of the Lord's house, proclaim there this word and say, hear the word of the Lord, all you men of Judah, who entered these gates to worship the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, amend your ways and your deeds, and I will let you dwell in this place. Do not trust in these deceptive words. This is the temple of the Lord. This is the temple of the Lord. This is the temple of the Lord. What's happening is the people know Babylonians are going to come upon them and they are going to crush us. But instead of repenting and turning to the Lord, the people were pointing to the temple. God will never let anything bad happen to us because His temple is here. They could have just as easily said, because His ark is here. They had transferred their faith in the ark to their faith in the temple and forgot the God that made both of them holy. And so what does God do? He says, repent. Mend your ways and your deeds. And he will go on to say in verse 5, for if you truly amend your ways and your deeds, if you truly execute justice one with another, if you do not oppress the sojourner, or the fatherless, or the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place, if you do not go after gods to your own harm, then I will let you dwell in this place, in the land that I gave of old to your fathers forever. But then he says, verse 8, do not trust in deceptive words to no avail. Don't trust when people say nothing bad will happen to us because of the temple or because of the ark. Don't use these things as lucky charms. Trust in God. I want to submit this to you as well. That Uzzah's fatal touch was a culmination of prior irreverence, not an isolated incident. Now, according to Numbers chapter 4 and verse 15, anyone who touches the ark, they are going to die. But did you notice everything that's been leading up to it? I would submit to you that he's not a Levite, and yet he's grown up with the Ark of the Covenant in his home. He's not supposed to be handling the Ark, not merely just touching it, but transporting it, and he's doing that. The Ark of the Covenant is only supposed to be transported not for military reasons, as David seems to have wanted it, but for spiritual and worship reasons. They're not supposed to put it on a cart. They're supposed to carry it on poles, and yet they do that. And yet every single one of these is building up to the point where it seems to cross the line and touch it, and he dies. So rarely is it one sin that captures anyone's soul. It's a culmination of one disregard for what God says upon another disregard for what God says upon another one. And that's why, even at the very beginning, when we see temptation creeping into our lives, we've got to squelch it then and there, lest it build, lest it build, lest it build. Then we find ourselves doing something we never would have imagined we would ever do. It's just a culmination of prior irreverence for God. It was in that moment of divine wrath, because all people in this procession deserved death, but it was only one who died on behalf of the rest. I would submit to you that David was just as guilty as Uzzah. His motives seem to be completely wrong. He's not consulting with the Levites. He's not consulting with God. He's consulting with military commanders about moving the ark. Ahio, Uzzah's brother. Sure, he didn't touch the ark, but look at all the other things that he participated in. This one died in place of all. 2 Samuel talks about Uzzah's error. I want you to hear, I'm going to go to 1 Chronicles. I want you to hear how the term that David uses. 1 Chronicles 15. We're just going to look at verse 13. So here, we've already kind of started this reading. David's going to gather. So in the first gathering, David is gathering military commanders, chosen military commanders. After Uzzah dies and he discovers the error of his ways, he begins to assemble the Levites, the sons of Aaron and the sons of Kohath, beginning at verse 5. And we have a listing then of all of these Levites. He's going to say to them in verse 12, you are heads of your father's houses of the Levites, so consecrate yourself, you and your brothers, so that you may bring up the ark of the Lord, the God of Israel, to the place that I have prepared for it. Because you did not carry it the first time, the Lord our God broke out against us. Notice what David doesn't say. The Lord broke out, well, only against Uzzah. He was the only one that was at fault because he touched it. No, he says us. David recognizes his own guilt, his own deserving of God's wrath. But only one died instead of all of them dying. Does that sound kind of familiar? It does, doesn't it? Well, I want to proceed and give you these last 3 points. God's holiness. There are demands made because God is holy. So God's holiness is going to demand. I'm just going to give you just 3 things. God's holiness demands that we regard Him as holy. I'm going to go to Psalm 19. If you want to go over there with me, I want to take a moment and read this particular psalm. Psalm 99. I have lost my glasses, okay? I've lost my glasses. I can't find them. And if I squint really hard, I can read that back there. I do have printouts up here so that I know what it's saying. I will get to the doctor before too long and get some new glasses. They're lost in the house. I've offered the kids money if they'll just find them. I cannot find them anywhere. Psalm 99. The Lord our God is holy. Verse 1. The Lord reigns, let the peoples tremble. He sits enthroned above the cherubim, let the earth quake. The Lord is great in Zion, He is exalted over all peoples. Let them praise your great and awesome name, holy is He. The King is in His might, loves justice. You have established equity. You have executed justice and righteousness in Jacob. Exalt the Lord our God. Worship at His footstool. Holy is He. Moses and Aaron were among His priests. Samuel was also among those who called upon His name. They called to the Lord and He answered them. In the pillar of the clouds He spoke to them. They kept His testimony and the statutes that He gave them. O Lord our God, You answered them. You were a forgiving God to them, but an avenger of their wrongdoings. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at His holy mountain, for the Lord our God is holy. God is holy, and His holiness demands that we regard Him as holy, as sacred, as set apart from us, above us, greater than us, not equal to us, to be regarded with great reverence and awe. Well, because of that, and we are the kind of people who are supposed to be protectors of His name. I'm just going to go back to Exodus 20. Exodus 20. And here we have the giving of the 10 Commandments. And these stones would have been placed inside the tabernacle. And I want you to notice what it says in verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. For the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. There is a right way to speak God's name, and there is a wrong way to speak God's name. To speak God's name in worship, to speak God's name in teaching, that is the right way. But to use God's holy name as a byword, that is the wrong way. That is to regard His holy name as common, as nothing. Do you notice what He says? The one who does not protect my holy name, who uses it in vain, will suffer God's wrath. He will, as it says in verse 7, will not hold him guiltless who takes God's name in vain. Jesus will echo this. I'm going to go to Matthew chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount. As Jesus is on the mountain dispensing the law, it kind of parallels Moses on the mountain receiving the law. Matthew chapter 5, I'm just going to pick it up with verse 33. He's going to say, again, you have heard it was said, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is His footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. What he's talking about is this kind of this Jewish idea that if you swore by the temple, well, maybe you had to do it. If you swore by the gold of the temple, well, then maybe you didn't have to do it. Or if you swore by heaven, you only had to do half of it. Just these ways of trying to get around having to do what you say. But what I want you to notice is he is pointing to the fact here. Do not use heaven. Do not use the temple or something religious or your mother's grave. Do not even use the earth because it is His footstool. Protect God's name and who He is because He is too awesome and too great and too holy for us to make use of His name in such a common, dare I say, even arrogant way. He is too holy for that. And then lastly, because He is so great and He is so holy, that we are supposed to be people who reflect His holiness. 1 Peter chapter 1. There is no 1 Peter chapter 13. The problem is I can actually see my computer monitor kind of well to type up. 1 Peter chapter 1, beginning with verse 13. He's going to say, therefore prepare your minds for action, be sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, verse 14, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, but as He who called you is holy, you also be holy in your conduct, since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. The way we live is supposed to be a reflection of God's holiness. God abhors sin, therefore we abhor sin. God does not lie, therefore we do not lie. God does not take advantage of people, therefore we don't take advantage of people. We reflect His holy character in everything we say, in everything we think, and everything we do. But I want to end with this. I'm going to go back to 2 Samuel. Because living a life that wholly reflects, or living a life that reflects God's holiness, is not some kind of stoic existence. What was the problem that David encountered when he first wants to move the ark? He runs into God's holiness and people die. And so he learns his lesson. I think he changes his motives and wants to bring the ark for the glory of God into Jerusalem, not just for some military exercise. He has the right people show up. He has the Levites and the son of Kohath to come and to carry the ark. So he has the right motives and the right people and the right method. But look at what he does as they are bringing the ark into Jerusalem the second time. We'll learn in verse 12 that it's been told to the king that the Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom. This is where they took the ark after Uzzah dies. It says all that belonged to him was blessed because of the ark of God. So David went and he brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And when those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, he sacrificed an oxen and a fattened animal. And David danced before the Lord with all of his might. David was wearing a linen ephod. And so David and all the house of Israel brought the ark to the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the horn. Being holy as our God is holy doesn't necessitate that we be stoics who just walk around all the time with a sour expression on our face. Being holy as God is holy is joyous. It expresses itself with great joy for our God. David, as he is dancing before the Lord, is reflecting the holiness of God. We serve a great and mighty God who stands above us not only in the heavens, but in His entire existence. His holiness demands we respect, revere, and stand in awe of Him. May we not transgress His holiness. May we not transgress His holiness in the way that we live by profaning who we are as His children with sin. May we not profane His holiness with our lips by taking His name in vain. And may we declare His holiness and the joyous life that we live for Him. Our God is holy, and He demands we respect His holiness. And so let us do that with our lives. We have a song of encouragement selected for you. It's been a good day today. Caleb did an amazing job this morning challenging us to be ambassadors for the Lord. I hope we've added to that by challenging us to regard our God as holy. And so if you have a spiritual need this evening, whatever it is, won't you come while together we stand and sing.